episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Verendez, and today we have Massimo Mazzucco. He's a filmmaker from Italy, Italian filmmaker who's done some of my favorite documentaries, one called A New American Century, the one that I absolutely love and I highly recommend and always sharing and suggesting, 9/11 in Newark Harbor, and also Cancer, the Forbidden Cures, which is another one I highly suggest you guys check out. All three of those are on YouTube. You can just Google them, search them, you'll find them. But he's also done The True History of Marijuana, The Lords of the World, The Other Dallas, and his film that he's working on now called American Moon, which is all about the moon hoax and the moon landing. And it's funny, that's one of those conspiracy theories when I was younger that I'm always like, oh, that seems kind of crazy. But the more you look into it, the more inconsistencies you find. So really interesting. And if any of his other work dictates how his new film's going to be, I'm sure he's going to really examine and dissect all the evidence and really do a good job of getting to his conclusion. So also, his moon landing movie is one that's still in the process of being made. So I'm going to give you guys links to his GoFundMe account, and you can help support this guy. He also has all his documentaries on Amazon. So if you want to support his work and show support, go on Amazon, look up any of these documentaries, and buying the DVD goes to helping him out. So I know a lot of people watch a lot of these documentaries and listen to a lot of podcasts and don't contribute, which is okay because we live in a world where we're used to getting a lot of the stuff we enjoy for free. But if you ever have some spare change and want to help out, please do go to his GoFundMe account, American Moon GoFundMe, or purchase one of these DVDs on Amazon. And also talking about helping out, if you guys want to help out this show, like I've told you guys in the beginning of every episode since I started doing it, I also have a Patreon page, which you can contribute whatever you can afford to contribute to the show, and anything is helpful. If you don't want to contribute any actual money, then what you can do is also review this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever you listen to it, or on YouTube. Give thumbs up to the videos or whatever, and any of those things can help get people exposed to the show and help. Honestly, I'm not sure how it helps. I'm kind of bullshitting my way out of that whole topic because I think it helps with people just being suggested the show because it has better ratings and stuff and reviews. I'm assuming. I think that's what I've heard. So, but either way, it does something positive to the show. So please do that. And also Theory 6 Music, all the music you hear in the show, you can find it anywhere where there's digital downloads. And basically, all that money goes to continuing the music project and the podcast, which the music project has kind of taken a backseat to the podcast. So all the money goes to the podcast at the moment. And what else? What other news I have? Recently, I was invited to do a In the Deep End episode, which is Richard Grove from Tragedy and Hopes podcast that he does, where he has kind of a round table of people and share ideas and whatnot. So once that's out and available, I just did that recently. When was it? It was, I believe it was Thursday, April 27th. That sounds about right. Thursday, April 27th is when we did it. So he said it'd be a couple weeks before he does all the editing and it's out. So once that's out, I'll share it with you guys, or I don't know how he's putting it out, but I'll at least tell you how you can get a hold of it. So it was a really fun discussion. I think about 3-4 hours of talking about everything and anything. So a lot of geopolitic conversations, some stuff about, Alex Jones and some of the stuff that he's been talking about and doing recently in the news. So just a lot of fun and a really laid back, like this show. We did a little bit drinking, a little laughing and joking around. So it was a good combination of having a good time and also talking about serious topics. And also Fight with Friends. Hopefully I'll be doing another one for the next UFC event. So that's the live stream where we live stream us basically hanging out and doing a live podcast during the UFC event. So keep a lookout for that one for the next UFC event. And I have a bunch of guests coming up. So keep a lookout. In the next couple of weeks, you'll be getting at least a episode a week. So I know I took a little hiatus. Life's been a little busy, but we're back at it. So thanks again, guys. keep listening, keep downloading. I appreciate everybody who comments, and any new listeners, thanks a lot. And go through the archives. I've been very lucky to have a lot of really great guests on the show. So check it out, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Hey, Massimo, how are you?
How are you, Ricardo?
Not bad, not bad. Thanks for... What's that?
I was expecting a Latino person.
I'm Portuguese.
Oh, Portuguese. Okay, there you go. There you go. My son's name is Ricardo also, Ricky.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's a common Portuguese name. You know, a lot of times people do assume it's either Spanish, or if you're from America, you think it's somebody from, you know, Latin America, you know, Central or South America. But yeah, very common Portuguese name. I was born in Portugal, so it's nice that my parents gave me some traditional Portuguese names, even though nobody calls me Ricardo, because when I came to the States, I wanted to fit in. So I told everybody my name was Ricky because I didn't want to be the immigrant kid. So so then everybody called me Ricky, and then as I got older, my like my wife and people, you know, my friends and people are like, "Oh, I really like the name Ricardo. How come you don't use it?" And I'm like, you know, nobody knows me as Ricardo. You know, everybody calls me Ricky now. So then when I had my first son, we named him Ricardo, so that way the names, you know, go into some use.
Okay.
But yeah, so thank you so much. I know you're calling me in from Italy, and which is what time is it there right now? 4 or 5 in the afternoon?
It's 5 p.m. on Sunday.
Yeah. Awesome. This is a beautiful thing about technology, is that, you know, you can connect with people all over the world. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of your documentaries. It's funny because a while ago when we were emailing, we were talking about this. A while ago, I thought about having you on the show, and this was like, you know, years ago, and I think probably when I started my podcast, and I couldn't. I think I tried to look you up, and I couldn't find a Facebook or any type of contact information. And then I saw you recently, or I heard you recently on the Higher Side Chats, and Greg Carlwood has been on my show, and I'm a big fan of his, and he's you know, so I'm like, oh, you know what, let me give it a try. Let me see if I can get a hold of him. And so then luckily we connected, and I had you on. And what I love about your documentaries is you don't stray away from big topics, important topics, and somewhat controversial topics, and topics that I love to talk about on the show, because I think they're very important, you know, when it comes down to health, you know, and what we've been lied to about disease, and you know, and health, and also the 9/11, you know, you talked about the neocons and A New American Century, and so many interesting documentaries, the history of marijuana, and I think that you hit on so many important stories and historical things, because really, I mean, you're a historian. Your documentaries really go into the history of these topics and subjects, and you really nail it down with 9/11, A New Pearl Harbor, because you really show how 9/11 really was just history repeating itself. And so for my listeners who aren't familiar with some of your work, or really aren't familiar with you personally, how did you get involved in doing documentaries? You know, how did you end up wanting to do, you know, documentaries instead of other type of films and whatnot?
Well, I was earlier on in my life. I'm 62 now. Earlier on in my life, I was doing feature films, and that's actually the reason why I had moved to Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles from 1994 until 2013. I moved there because I wanted to make films, Hollywood films. I made only one. I was somehow getting ready to make my second one when 9/11 happened. And at the same time, internet exploded, or was born, as you want. And with the combination of the two was just devastating for me. To watch those towers come down, to know that there was something that I couldn't pin that wasn't right, and at the same time to have access on the internet to people who had the same problem, who didn't believe that what they saw was exactly what we were told that happened, started me on a whole new ball game. The internet became really my prior territory, so to speak. And mind you, in 2001, 2002, there wasn't much internet yet. In fact, for example, there were no websites in Italian at all that spoke about 9/11, while we already had a few in the States. There was already Alex Jones. There was the other guy. I don't remember his name now. I mean, there were quite a few already, but not in Italy. So I saw one website in Italy that was kind of covering alternative news, one of the first ones ever. I sent them a little picture of the demolition of the towers, with the mushroom, the cloud mushroom of cement going outwards instead of down. And all I did was to write on the picture, collapse or controlled demolitions. That was it. And with that picture in Italy kind of exploded, so to speak. These people were making like 40, 50 reads per article. My article went over 1,000 reads in 2002, which was huge. So I knew there was something there. There was an interest. So at the same time, I started researching 9/11. Of course, I started finding out things that weren't right with the official version. And I started building my own website. So basically, I found myself translated to the other side of the river, so to speak. And one day, I found myself making a documentary on 9/11 because I felt it was the most important thing at that point to do for me. Once you do realize some of those truths or actually some of those lies that have been put right on your face, you want to expose them. And being a filmmaker, so having the skills of a filmmaker, it became natural for me to make the transition. And then, as they say, one thing led to another. And after I made the first one on 9/11, it was broadcast by Italian television in 2006. It was pretty much a similar film to the one that in the States was called Loose Change by the three kids who made Loose Change. Mine was kind of similar, but it was for an Italian audience. And it was broadcast on Italian television. It had a huge impact. Everybody was talking about 9/11 after that. The discussion in Italy, I think Italy is one of the only country probably in the Western Hemisphere that has thoroughly discussed 9/11 on mainstream television, and that's because of that film that I made. So after that, I started becoming more interested. Internet is like a disease. Once you start, you don't stop. You start researching. One thing leads you to another and another.
You go down
I started
the rabbit
finding
hole.
connect. Excuse me?
Oh, you go down the rabbit hole, right?
Yes, yeah. And you don't come back.
Yeah.
So at the same time, I was falling off a little bit with the filmmaking, the regular filmmaking in Hollywood. I was finding it not harder, but different from what I expected it to be. It's more a machine than a human dimension. And at the same time, this documentaries really got me intrigued. I mean, researching is intriguing. And for me, I'm a one-man band. So the idea of be able to sit at home with your own computer and by yourself be able to do what in filmmaking used to take like 30 people to do. You need an editor, you need a cameraman, you need a scriptwriter, I could do everything myself in my little studio, in my little garage in Los Angeles. So I found myself doing this. It was a matter of a transition was not even, I didn't even realize. And then I find myself doing one after the other. After the first one, I made New American Century, which is about the political background of 9/11. So the first one was about the actual facts of 9/11, the towers collapsing, the planes not being there, and all that. The second one, New American Century, which is more historical, looks at the reasons why we think that whoever did 9/11 does not live far away from Washington. Then I started looking into cancer because of a friend of mine who had problems. I started finding out that there were so many possibilities and alternative cures for cancer that had been either rejected or suppressed, or sometimes doctors even had been put in jail for that. So I felt it was an important issue, and I made one called Cancer, the Forbidden Cures. In making that, I discovered that THC, marijuana, has a very good possibility against cancer. So I developed that into a whole new film. It became The True History of Marijuana. In the meantime, I also made one about UFOs. UFOs has never been my major passion. But one summer in, I think it was 2008, I remember Larry King doing like 3 different shows in 1 month about UFOs. And I remember paying a lot of attention to what Larry King was suggesting. And from that, I found the cue to go and look into the UFOs. And it's actually, the film is not, it's called UFOs and the Military Elite. And it's not really about a little green man. It's about the military and what the military has done in order to suppress the information on unidentified flying objects, UFOs. So whether they come from Earth or another planet, I don't know. But there's been a lot of suppression on those issues. Excuse me. Yeah. After that, I also made one. Also, I was researching the Kennedy assassination, and I found out I kind of became very attracted by the story of Robert Kennedy. I realized that his assassination was also an inside job, was not at all what we were told. So I found myself with this little chain of different issues that really tie together under one big umbrella name, which is the name I gave to the collection of my DVDs, which is called The Great Lies of History. I mean, all these stories are different. 9/11 is different from the Kennedy assassination and from the UFOs, but they all have in common the same pattern of lying by the government to the people. And so I felt that there was a connection on each of them. And this is the criterion that I follow now in making my new films. So every time I look at a possibility for a new documentary, I look for what's the big lie and how is it possible to expose it. And that's how I proceed.
Yeah, it's interesting because there is something interesting about history, how we all just accept whatever story is being told, and it'll just be told over and over again from generation to generation. And if there's never people like yourself who sit back and say, hey, you know what, maybe there's more to this story, maybe I should reanalyze the story, this historical event that they're telling me happened this certain way, and then really investigate in it, and then, you know, kind of expose the lies, then we'll just keep believing whatever we're being told. I've had Gerard Williams on, who wrote the book Grey Wolf: The Escape of Adolf Hitler, and I remember when I ran into his work and all the evidence that proved that Hitler made it to Argentina, or you know, and that he didn't die in Germany, I was just stunned. I was surprised. I'm like, oh my God, there's this other story that's not being told, and everybody just keeps believing the narrative and the mainstream historical history books. Whatever they say, we just kind of accept. And if there's not people like yourself and Gerard Williams, and I've had Manuel Rosa, who wrote the book on Columbus, The Untold Story of Columbus, I believe is what it's called. And if we don't have these people who say, hey, you know what, like, history is just people telling you the story, and if we just accept it and we don't reanalyze it and inspect the evidence, then, you know, we could be told lies and grow up believing lies, and in many cases that's what ends up happening. And when you looked into 9/11, and obviously you had a American Century, which was more about the neocons and the project for a new American Century and the PNAC documents and stuff like that. But what pieces of evidence really first made you question the events? Was it the buildings collapse? Was that the first thing that looked unusual, or
it's a two-step process. If you look with an open mind at the actual events of 9/11 and you study them a little bit in depth, you don't just buy the official version by CNN, you realize that the entire official story is a fabrication. If you look in detail, you'll see that, for example, there's not a single picture of one of these 19 hijackers at any of the 3 departing airports that morning. And that already in itself should be such a red flag that every journalist who wants to call himself by that name should have brought up on the next day. Why can't we see any picture? If you and I hijacked one of those planes from Boston or from Newark or from Dallas, they would have had pictures of us all over the place, entering the airport, doing the check-in, going to the bathroom, maybe not in the bathroom, but everything else they would have. None. We don't have a single piece of voice from the cockpit voice recorders of these people entering the cockpits and actually assaulting or killing, as we're told, the crews. There is not one. You never heard one of those. There's not one single name of Arabic name on the passages list, on the manifest that was put out by CNN and Associated Press on that day. So these 3 things already should be such red flags for anybody. You're asking me to believe that 19 crazy Arabic people with little knives diverted this plane. So you can't even show me a single picture of them at the airport? Or can I hear a little voice? No, nothing of that. Then, of course, you start looking at the actual crash sites, and you find more and more and more. I mean, I'm sure your audience is pretty used now to this issue, so we don't have to go in detail. But the very fact that there is no plane at the Pentagon and that there is no plane in the hole in Shanksville, it's very simple. And if you look, for example, such a shocking fact is that while we are told that the plane in Shanksville was taken down by the passengers because they revolted in order to save other people somewhere else in America, so the plane went down, they tell us, in one piece. Then you have CNN telling you that they found pieces of the plane, wreckage of the plane, 9 miles away, so 14 kilometers away, on a day when there was no wind. So how can you explain that? Obviously, that plane was not crashed in one piece to the ground. It was shot in midair. It takes nothing. It takes a 10-year-old child to figure these things out. So this is the first step. As you were asking me, how did I get to the realization? The first part is the physical evidence. It just doesn't hold water. The phone calls. We are told that they made phone calls from the airplane, cell phone calls. But then you go look at the height at which the planes were traveling when the phone calls were made, and the speed at which the plane was traveling at that time, and you know it's impossible. So you know that we're facing a entirely fabricated story. Then comes the second question, then who was it? And this is when you start looking at the motive that could have been behind. And by the way, the motive has become more clear and clear. It could have been not too clear on 2002 or 2003. By now that America has invaded first Afghanistan and then Iraq, the motive should have been clear, looking backwards, very clear anyway. You start looking at the motive, at the philosophy, at what actually those people did on 9/11. Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld in particular, they have stories that should have been brought in front of a grand jury immediately for the story. Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, disappears, literally disappears. Nobody can find him for half an hour during the time when his country is under attack. Everybody's looking for him, he's gone. Why would that be? He never explained that. Dick Cheney is in the White House giving orders not to shoot down the plane that's approaching Washington at 500 miles an hour. But nobody, of course, dared to ask those questions. So immediately when you see that behavior, you know where to look for your clues. And that's how you come to the second film, which is The New American Century, which puts together all the evidence that points at those people. You cannot prove, of course, that it was them, but it's very hard to think it was someone else after you see all that evidence.
Well, one thing I love about 9/11, A New Pearl Harbor, and I remember when I first ran into that documentary, I send links to, like, all my friends, I send links to the documentary. I'm like, you got to see this documentary. You got to, because there's a lot of documentaries that, a lot of 9/11 documentaries. But what I loved about that one was that you actually took each argument step by step and showed, like, okay, this is what the debunker says. This is what the evidence to prove that they're wrong and that what they're saying doesn't make sense. And you kept going back and forth. You kept showing both sides of the arguments. You kept one after one another, which is good because a lot of times people will look at a documentary, then they'll go on a website and say, oh, this was debunked. But you actually showed the debunkers talking. You showed their arguments. So there wasn't any need for any of that looking up and saying, oh, well, I'm sure this has been debunked type nonsense. So that was really interesting. I also like the fact that you open it up with telling the Pearl Harbor story, because just like a lot of things in history, as time goes by, the truth ends up being, exposed. And Pearl Harbor could have been prevented. And, and when you see things like Operation Northwoods and Pearl Harbor and times where the public has been lied to and they've used false flag attacks and stuff like that in history to justify intervention in a country or a war or whatever, or I think it's important to do that, to kind of start with history, to kind of let people know that, hey, you know what, this has happened before. 9/11 wasn't the first time this has happened throughout history. And I think that's important because a lot of times people will, if you even bring up, and I don't know how, maybe that's what my next question should be. I don't know how your Italian friends and how people in Europe handled people questioning 9/11, but in America, as I'm sure you well know, people got emotional. And I think because
Oh, yes.
a lot of people see it on TV, they were emotionally connected to the events. It was to see it, you know, to see the planes hit the buildings, it seems so surreal and something that was unthinkable, that if you even bring up the idea that maybe the government could have had a hand in it or at least let it happen, people just get so emotional that the first reaction is to deny it. And
Of course.
in Europe, do they have the same type of, you know,
No, it's a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier for us because, again, when you talk about 9/11 here, for example, in Italy, you're talking about another country. So what we're saying here is they did it to themselves, they being the Americans. For American people, of course, it's much more difficult because you have to admit that you did it to yourself, and that's not very easy. I want to go back a little bit on what you mentioned before about the structure of the film and the debunkers and presenting both sides. That, of course, that's the reason why the new Pearl Harbor is 5 hours long, first of all, because for each argument, I have to present first the claim by the 9/11 Truth, complaining about the complaint or the claim against the official version. Then you have to present what the debunkers came up with in order to excuse that explanation. And then you have to debunk their debunking. So basically what has happened throughout the years is we've been through three phases. The first phase was, let's say, 2002 through 2006. The 9/11 Truth movement came about, was born, coalesced somehow around some common ideas, and started criticizing the hole in the Pentagon, B, the missing plane in Shanksville, C, the way the towers collapsed, and so on. From 2006 to 2010, you have the reaction of the system. Because the truth movement and the claims had become so loud, then the system intervened and the bunkers came into place, and you have a great example in Popular Mechanics there, and they counterattacked. So they came up with some kind of explanation for each of the claims of the 9/11 Truth movement. So now you have a double layer of lies. You have the original lie, which is the official version, and you have the second layer of lies, which the things that the debunkers have come up with in order to protect the original lie. I'll give you one very quick example. When you watch the footage of the towers collapsing, you see squibs or explosions coming out from the sides. So the 9/11 Truther says those are squibs, those are explosions. That's the sign that they use controlled demolitions. Then the debunkers came about with an excuse. They says, no. Those are not explosions. Those are windows exploding because of the air pressure coming from above. So now you have to go to a third step, take and show, for example, a diagram of the structure of the towers, the way they were built, and you show why, for example, this window could not be exploding here when the collapse has only reached that floor over there. So it has become very, very difficult. And it happens in every major controversy, because not only do you have the original lie, but then you have all these little lies that these little, let me say, bastards come up with, and you have to break down one by one each of them. It's the only way. I'm going through the same thing now, making a film now, but the moon hoax.
The American moon.
Yeah, the American moon is called. If you let me digress into that a little bit, I became aware, and I'm convinced, I'm actually positive, that those pictures of the moon are taken on Earth. I've been a photographer for 30 years, professional photographer, so I know. Now I'm looking for a way to show it to people, but I know for sure. So I am absolutely convinced that those pictures were not taken on the moon. Whether they went to the moon or not with some other means, I don't know, but the Apollo missions, the way they were shown to us, are fake. But now that I'm tackling this, I find, because this is another big controversy, and the debunkers are all over the place on this one too, defending NASA. For each of them, there is a little excuse. They say, oh no, that shadow is there because of blah, 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 blah. So first you have to do the claim, then you have to show what they say, and then you have to show why what they say doesn't stand. It's a very, very complicated process, but it's very satisfactory in a way, because like you said, once you see A, B, and C, you don't need to go look for anywhere else, for another answer anywhere else, because I already gave it to you what they say.
Exactly.
And I make them say from their own mouth. I don't say they say this. I let them speak. I cut clips from their own conferences so you can hear them making their point. So there's no argument there. And then I show that their point, hopefully I show, that their point is wrong, and therefore we're right.
Yeah, no, and actually, and that's a good point, because I do love that about your film. I mean, I think that's what made a new Pearl Harbor, 9/11 new Pearl Harbor, so important for me in my life, and if I had a documentary I wanted to share with people, it was always 9/11 Press for Truth, because I really showed it didn't get into any really the conspiracies, but it showed what these Jersey women went through, and how they had to force the government to even investigate 9/11. And then yours, which all these theories that people were calling, oh, that's just conspiracy theory, doesn't make sense, and all the things that had to go perfect for the official story to make sense, then you actually debunked every single part of that one by one. And in the process of doing that, was there ever a time where you were trying, so you had a theory that you're like, okay, this makes sense, and then you went to go look at the debunker and you're like, you know what, actually he actually makes sense at the moment too? Yeah. Did you have anything like that where you actually had to retract maybe your initial opinion after doing some investigation?
No, let me put it this way. I made a couple of mistakes in terms of thinking. Sorry. Sorry. I made a couple of mistakes in terms of thinking that some talking points were actually valid proofs and they were not. But that's not because of the explanation that the debunkers gave me. The debunkers always act with the same pattern. They look for the most apparently plausible explanation for whatever you have observed, because they know that the person who likes to hear the debunkers and wants to be reassured will not go and check what they say. So if the debunkers say, oh, no, that's just the window exploding, is not an actual dynamite charge, the person who is listening to the debunker wants to hear that, therefore will not question his explanation. So the way they work is it's very easy in a way. They find whatever is apparently a good explanation for everything, and people who want to hear them are satisfied with that. But in my case, studying 9/11, there were a couple of issues. Like, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with the pod issue. In the very beginning, 2002, 2003, there was the issue of the pod. It appeared that the plane that hits the second tower seemed from below as like an extension on the right-hand side of the fuselage. That was that was called the pod. In the beginning, I believed that was actually a pod, so an attached explosive device to the exterior of the fuselage. Then I realized by my own analysis, though not because of what the debunker said, that that was a result of lighting, because I seen a similar picture of a similar plane with a similar lighting, and it had exactly the same shape. So I realized that was a mistake, and I took it away from my talking points. But never because of what they say, because they lie, purposefully lie. They're not skeptics. If they were skeptics, they would have some point somewhere. But they know that they're wrong. They know they're defending a lie, and they're actually trying to build another lie on top of the original lie. So for me, it has become very, very easy now to expose them, because I know they always use the same technique. There's 3, 4, 5, 6 solutions. They always have the solutions. They're always the same. I even wrote a little booklet in Italian against the debunkers, how to debunk a debunker, and it explains. And this they're just really patterns of thinking. They go for your weak side. They go for what seems apparently logical to you, and they give you that. And most people take that as a lifesaver, and they don't want to look any further. That's why they have a certain success.
Well, I definitely agree that the thing with a skeptic and a debunker, it's very different. And I think a lot of times people think they're skeptics, but they're not. And being a skeptic doesn't mean you pick a side. Being a skeptic just means that whatever the evidence you're looking at, you're going to be skeptical of it. And whatever story you hear, you're going to be skeptical of it. It doesn't matter if it's the official story or if it's a conspiracy theory or whatnot. But I think a lot of times people are I said this recently to it's a quote I say all the time. Some people think that they look at the facts, then come up with a conclusion, but the majority of the time you have an opinion and then you look for the facts to defend that conclusion. And I think that unfortunately that's the psyche that most people work with, and we pick the story we want to believe, and then we look for the evidence to kind of back that story. But I think I don't know what your opinion is, but I think it kind of you see it on both sides. You know, you see it on the skeptics and the debunkers, that the people who are or they call themselves skeptics, but what they're really doing is they're just anything that you might say that makes sense. They're just trying to break it down so then they can kind of stay, you know, keep building their lies. But then you also see it on the other side where you get you know, people, you know, the truthers, for lack of a better term, you know, the 9/11 truthers who will no matter what, you know, whatever their opinion is on what happened on September 11th, they'll end up, you know, just disregarding any other information or evidence, because it almost becomes like a dogma, kind of cultish a little bit, because there's a lot of conflicting opinions on September 11th. You know, I've had James Corbett on, I've had John Gold, I've had Ryan Dawson, I've had a lot, you know, Richard Grove. I've had a lot of different people who are a part of this 9/11, you know, exposing the lies of 9/11. But a lot of them have different opinions on what exactly happened.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, a lot of them had different opinions on what happened, on, you know, maybe on what actually hit the towers or what hit the Pentagon or this and that. I mean, but I think that the goal is that we're all trying to expose a lie, and we know that we've been lied to. And maybe if the details aren't correct, or maybe if we don't all agree on each specific, you know, piece of information at each specific detail, then, you know, I think the most important thing isn't so much what happened to that, you know, what exactly hit the Pentagon or what didn't hit the Pentagon, but what's important is that, hey, you know, if we can all help each other tell the American public and tell, you know, just the world that, hey, we've been lied to and they use this to justify wars and all these other interventions, then maybe that's the more important, bigger picture.
Well, what you touched on, it's very important. It was particularly important in the 9/11 truth movement, because up to some point, everybody was just basically exposing the lie of the official version. Then it started to come what they called competing theories. For example, on the collapse of the towers, you have at least 3 different schools of thought on the way they were brought down. One is the termite, one is the mini nukes, and one is the direct energy Judy Wood theory. At least 3, if not more. What I try to do is refrain from giving the answer. And my slogan is keep asking the question, do not provide the answer, because that's when you fall. If I say the Pentagon was not hit by a 757, and I can prove that, then I leave it up to you to tell me what it was that hit it or how was that hole made. If I start saying it was not hit by a 757, it was a cruise missile, for example, then the burden of proof comes on me. And then you have the very debunkers who say, oh yeah, it was a cruise missile? Prove it. How was it possible that a missile is this big, this high, and this fast? And suddenly the burden of proof is on you. So what I've been trying to tell, ineffectively obviously, all the people in the 9/11 truth movement, let's not provide for the answer. Let's wait for those who lied to us to tell us what happened. I'm not here to tell you what they used to take down the towers. All I know is that they came down too fast to be a natural collapse. End of story. Now, you're the one who told me that they came down because of that. You lied to me. You tell me how you did it. So it's really a matter of where the burden of proof is. Once we take it upon us, the problems begin, because you have what you call competing theories. I always try to keep away from that, and I strongly, even though it's too late now, but I keep still suggesting everybody stay away. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter whether you mini nukes or termite or both, or 3 systems or 4 systems altogether, all of the above. Who cares? The point is that, like you said, they lied to us. They were not collapsing naturally on their own. Therefore, those who have lied to us should tell us what they did and how they did it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a great way of putting it, because I think that really is the most important thing. And that's a good way of going about it. Instead of arguing about what we think actually happened, let's just all agree, you know, that what they say happened definitely wasn't what happened, and at least we can all agree on that. And I think that, you know, what ends up happening with all this infighting is that it ends up getting people, it deflects their attention from what's really important. And what's really important is that, you know, anybody who has tried to expose this information and share this information and spark these conversations are people who have a heart and feel bad for the people who lost loved ones, for basically, you know, for the military-industrial complex and to keep wars going. I mean, and I think that's what bothers us, and that's what motivates us. And me having children and being a father, and I'm not sure if you have any kids, but this stuff becomes more and more important because it's like we want to do our best in trying to leave the world a little better than when we got it. So then our kids going to have a better world to live in. So I just think it's it really becomes counterproductive when people are arguing about, is it Judy Woods is crazy, or this theory is crazy, or that theory is crazy. I'm like, you know what? There are theories out there that I don't believe, and there are people out there that I don't agree with all their, their theories on what happened. But if their heart's in the right place and they truly are just trying to expose the lies, at least they're sparking thought, and at least they're planting the seed, and they're getting people to reanalyze what we've been told. And I think that's the much more important. And the other thing I love about your film was I love the fact that you show a lot of first reports from local news and people who got to the sites, and people and people and firemen who said that they heard explosions, because this is stuff that's coming right out of people's mouths. You can look back and say, hey, that plane that fell in Pennsylvania didn't look like a plane, but that's just me and you looking at pictures, and that's just our opinion. But when you hear reports from people that were there and saw it and said, I don't know where they say this plane crashed because I don't see anything. I think that's much more telling. And
I mean, it's the mayor of the city, Shanksville, gets to the spot and said, we came to see the plane crash, the site of the plane crash, and there was no plane. This is the mayor of the city. It's not just a drunken man under a tree, saying that. There was no plane. So all those little pieces here and there, but there's nothing. There was no plane. Those testimonies are very, very powerful because, like you say, first of all, they're collected immediately after the event, before people have had a chance to infiltrate you, tell you what to say or not to say. And that's really what the most precious material is, what has been recorded and collected in the next 24 hours. Because after that, the propaganda machine kicks in and starts correcting. For example, the same mayor of Shanksville, who on the same day said there is no plane, was later forced to say, like 3 years later, because he became famous for what he had said initially, was later forced to say, oh, no, I never meant to say that there was. I mean, when you start crawling up, we say in Italian, crawling up glass or windows, because you can't really crawl up a window. He was forced to recant, basically, which is even more telling, in my opinion. Whenever you have somebody saying something on the first day, and then 3 months later or 3 years later being forced to recant, it's even stronger, his original testimony. It's like Galileo. Galileo was forced to recant. When they forced him to recant, they actually confirmed that he was right in what he was saying.
Do you think in Europe, or just, I guess, foreigners in general, because it seems like, I have family in France, I have family in Portugal and in Switzerland, and it seems like people are just better informed in other countries on even American current events and history. And it just seems like, I've used this example before, that America seems like a mild version of North Korea. Like, we get sold all this propaganda, and the news controls, or those in power control the media. They control the news. They control what information we're being fed. So because of it, they also control what we believe and what we think. So it just seems like people are so misinformed in America, where you leave the country, and like yourself, it's pretty amazing that Italian filmmakers made one of my favorite films on 9/11, and one of the best put together films.
I was living in the States at the time, but that doesn't really matter. Your question has an answer, and in that also you must think that for Europeans, America is very important. While for the Americans, Europe is not necessarily that important. America is the center of the Western world, and Europe is little provinces, like in the Roman Empire. They had faraway provinces. Yes, of course, sometimes something interesting comes out of them, but it's really Rome that matters. And in this case, it's America that matters. So we look at America with much more attentive eyes than any American would look at any of the European countries because of the relation of importance. That's one thing. In terms of controlling the population through the media, it's pretty much the same, because the media here are, of course, controlled by the same power groups that control the state. It's the same gang of people, so to speak. But in Europe, we have a tradition of being more against, we don't just swallow everything that the media brings to us. In fact, in the last year or two, I've noticed that the more media pushes in a certain direction, the more people react in the opposite direction. For example, with the Brexit, the exit of England, of Great Britain from the European Union. There was so much propaganda one way. All propaganda was in favor of staying. Everybody wanted to leave. Was crazy. They were doomed. They were going through a disaster. They don't know what's coming. And the more and more and more they pushed it, and the more the people went over to the other side. A little bit of that has happened also in the States with Trump. I mean, Clinton had practically all the media for her. And the more they put, I'm not saying that I particularly like Trump, I'm just looking objectively at what happened, okay? But the more they push this crazy guy is not trustable, we cannot, give him the nuclear codes and all that. Well, guess what? He has the nuclear codes and he won the election. So the media is really starting to fail their original purpose, which is the one to guide the way people think. I think we are at the brink of a very, very, very profound revolution in communication. I've been sensing this in the last 2 years already. Every time it's more and more. It's going to be harder and harder for the media to control, for propaganda to be effective. There will always be propaganda. They will always try, and they will always partially succeed, but less and less and less than before. Whatever was easy 20 years ago, it's more difficult now for them. And I hope it keeps going this way, because it's the only hope we have, is that people grow up and start thinking with their own brain and therefore question everything and become real skeptics, like you were saying before. The real skeptic is not one who stands on one side or the other, is one who wants to be shown the proof of whatever he needs to believe. That's what a skeptic is by definition. If everybody became like that, then you can choose in which, you might want to look at things and believe that 9/11 was made by 19 Arabic hijackers. Fine, if you get to that conclusion after a process of personal thinking and reasoning, fine, I accept that. But it's important that everybody learns to do their own process, and we don't just rely on someone else doing it for us.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. Have you ever heard the video or the audio of Trump? I think it was on September 11th or maybe a day after. He was doing a radio interview, and he's like, oh, I've been in a lot of meetings with architects and engineers, and I know, a lot about construction, and there's no way those buildings came down because planes hit them. It was something along those lines. But he was very skeptical of the official story that the planes brought down all three towers. And actually, amazingly enough, in 2017, there's still people who don't know a third tower came down on September 11th. But, again, regardless what your opinion is on Trump, and I personally also, I do know that he might know a little bit about construction, because he did spend his whole life around job sites and buildings and architects and engineers. So
he has towers and buildings everywhere. So I'm sure that the first thing he said on the evening of September 11 must have called his architects and said, guys, are our buildings possibly at risk of collapse because of fire? And I'm sure they must have said, no way, don't worry about it. So yes, working with that, because of all the towers he has and all the buildings and skyscrapers that he's built around the world, he sure has people who told him that that was impossible. I'm sure everybody in the industry of architects and engineers knows those towers did not come down. Of course, they don't want to say it. There's only a small group of people who had the courage to say that. They're called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, led by Richard Gage in San Francisco. There's actually 2,500 of them all over the world, signatories, which is a lot, for taking a position that's really uncomfortable and does not give you any advantage and only calls for people to basically hate you and try to push you aside. So it is a lot, 205,000 architects who had the courage to state that. But I'm sure that 99.9% of architects know that those buildings did not come down by natural collapse. They would be in the wrong business if they didn't know that. They have to know better.
I think the other thing that's really interesting is what that you highlighted on your documentary was Operation Northwoods, and how even when we had that conflict with Cuba and we had the Northwoods operation to fly a fake drone plane and then shoot it down and blame the Cubans. I mean, to think that that long ago we already had drone technology, is insane, because it shows you how probably advanced the military is, and how by the time this technology becomes nationally known and we know of it, who knows how advanced their technology they have in secret, is. So it's this idea, because when September 11th happened, a lot of people thought like, a drone plane hitting something, that sounds crazy. But now looking back and how common drones are, I mean, I can go to the local store and just buy a little drone. It's
that's right. I never thought of that. Actually, the word drone, I don't think it ever appears anywhere before that document. That's dated 1962. So for that word to be in a document dated 1962, they must have been really way ahead of what we knew. Yeah, you're right. It's a very, very good thought.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you emphasized that on your.
I actually never. You just made me realize that. I assumed the word drone had always been around, but in fact it wasn't. And they had no drones officially in the 1960s, last century. So the fact that they used the word means that they actually had them and we didn't know about it. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Well, I also want to talk about Cancer, the Forbidden Cures, because this is a documentary and a topic that hits home with a lot of us, because, I've had loved ones and people pass away of cancer. I've had Dr. Brzezinski on my show. He was, I think the first year I did my show, he was one of my first guests on. And
wow.
Are you familiar with him, Dr. Brzezinski from
Texas?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, I couldn't fit him into my film because I discovered him too late. I had already finished the edit, and I was already putting out the film when I found out about him. But he's one of them, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of his. I mean, his battle with the FDA and Big Pharma, and just, believe me, I had a lot of people on that are controversial, but very few people got as many emails and tweets saying that this guy's a quack as Dr. Brzezinski. I know even at the time I had a buddy of mine who was co-hosting with me, and he's like, hey, I've never heard of Dr. Brzezinski, but everything I look up seems like it's bullshit. It seems like, it's all pseudoscience. And I'm like, of course you do, because I'm like, when there's that much money in the cancer industry, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to try to suppress any alternative treatments or whatnot. So I'm like, you know what? I'm glad you're skeptical. When you come on the show, I'm like, I want you to ask him questions, because I'm a fan, so I might not be skeptical enough on the show for maybe some listeners. I'm like, I hope you're skeptical. And then after the show, I'm like, hey, Dave, what did you think of Dr. Brzezinski? He's like, unbelievable. He's like, I don't know how anybody can be giving this guy a hard time. He's, and it's crazy.
You know what I do when they call me a conspiracy theorist, either on radio, television here, which they use as a label just to get rid of you, right?
Of course.
Instead of hiding away and say, oh, no, I'm not really a conspiracy. I say, it's okay. I'll accept, I'll take the label, and I'm a conspiracy theorist. But you now you need to accept on your side, I'll challenge you on discussing any given topic on 9/11, for example, in detail. And I have my evidence, and you show me that my evidence is wrong. Are you ready to do that? And they all chicken away. They chicken out and they go, no, yeah, well, blah, 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 and they're gone. So one good suggestion for me is whenever somebody calls you a conspiracy theorist or tries to label you as a whack, instead of saying, oh, no, I'm not really one of those, if you are prepared on the issues that you're ready to discuss, bring them up and says, okay, I am. Now, you're ready to discuss any given issue? I tell these people, I'll challenge you on anything, the Moonhawks, the Kennedy assassination, the 9/11 attacks, anything you want. I'm ready. Any issue within these major controversies, let's discuss it here live on television, and you prove to me that I'm not worth anything. And usually they swear away, they change the subject, and they say, well, there's not enough time. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I completely agree. I think, that's the thing when anytime, and I've, my wife will be at a gathering and somebody will bring up something like September 11th or cancer or some of these topics or vaccines, any of these topics that, are kind of controversial. And she'll look at me like, Ricky, don't you say anything, and
don't get trouble.
Yeah, but I can't help it because the same thing. I'm like, there's people who are just misinformed, and if I can, and I'm similar like yourself. I try to have a logical conversation. So what I try to do is I'm like, what? Let's not argue about it. Let's just go from fact. Let's look at each fact. Let's look at each event, each incident. And let's talk about it, and let's see, why you believe what you believe and why I believe what I believe, and go through it. And you know what? If I happen to be wrong, I'll admit I'm wrong. But I hope that if you happen to be wrong, you also admit you're wrong. And the beautiful thing about the internet is that when I got an argument with a buddy of mine, not too long ago about, oh, you need some carbs in your diet, this and that. And I was talking about how the whole sugar industry and how the sugar industry convinced us not to eat fats. And there's all this science proving that high fats in your diet doesn't lead to clogged arteries and high cholesterol and all this stuff. And so I end up, the nice thing about the internet, I can send them the links, I can send them the science, I can send them the research right there and then. And, which is nice because it's something I've even done with your documentaries. I've sent Cancer, the Forbidden Cures to a lot of people. And, it's one of those, that and the Brzezinski documentary, which I've had Eric Marola on and Dr. Brzezinski. Those are really important documentaries because, again, it shows that there are alternative options out there. But the average person who goes to the doctors and they go and they ask, hey, what's my options? It's always the same thing. It's always chemo and radiation, and that's it. You have that's your options, and years and years and millions of dollars go into investing in cancer research. There's always these cancer parades and cancer walks and cancer runs and cancer fundraisers, and all this money is going to cancer research. But yet every year goes by, and we're not. There's no new mainstream treatment, and it's,
of course not. They don't want one. They don't want one.
Exactly.
The industry needs their patients even more than the patients need the industry.
Yeah.
Each cancer patient is worth, I think, $300,000 or $400,000 in average by the time he's diagnosed until the time he dies. Why do you want to cure him? Why do you want him not to be sick with cancer if he's going to produce that amount of money? It's very simple. What I think is interesting about the alternative cures of cancer is that there are many, many, many different ones and very different from each other. I mean, you go from shark cartilage to sodium bicarbonate to the Brzezinski thing to the SCACT, and one wonders, how is it possible that so many things so different from each other actually work against cancer, or appear to work, let's put it this way. My answer, I found this answer, which I think is very important to keep in mind, that most of these so-called cures, they don't actually cure cancer. They simply restore your immune system. It is then your immune system that cures cancer and kills it. For example, the SCACT and the Gerson therapy have absolutely nothing in common, except for the fact that they both restore your immune system at 110%. So what I believe is that one should look at, when you look at alternative therapies, don't look at them as a solution that's directed against the cancer, but a solution that's directed at reinforcing your immune system. Of course, on the opposite spectrum of this reasoning, you have chemotherapy, which kills your immune system. So the first thing anybody should do, and I'm not a doctor, but this I can strongly suggest, be careful before anybody begins chemotherapy, because while chemotherapy will in fact kill some cancer cells, it will also kill whatever remaining immune system you have. So after you're done with the moment of splendor, so to speak, then you'll drop down into your grave, because your immune system will be gone completely. So the first thing that one should do when he has cancer is not to kill whatever he has left of the immune system with chemotherapy, but to reinforce it, to boost it with any possible way. Unless you're terminal, I find that there's always a way to boost your immune system, one or more ways, to boost it and let your immune system do the job. There was a research, do we have a couple of more minutes?
Yeah, oh yeah, we have as much time as I have at least.
Okay.
Yeah, we have time. Yeah, plenty of time.
Okay. There's a research that was done recently, I think in Sweden or Denmark, one of those countries. They made statistics on the autopsies that they executed on dead people, of course. And they found that I think it's 2 people out of 3 have had cancer at least once or twice in their life, and then it didn't develop, meaning they found the beginning of a tumor that was then suppressed by something which is the immune system, of course. In other words, I may die tomorrow by a heart attack. They do an autopsy, and maybe they find that I had at least 2 cancers in my life which were actually killed or put under control by my immune system. So when your immune system is at full power, I think that cancer really has a hard time prevailing. Our body knows how to cure itself. We don't have to find a specific cure against the cancer. We need to find the best way for each of us to boost our immune system as much as possible. That's the biggest lesson I've learned from researching the cancer therapy thing.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the best medicine is just increasing your immune system. I mean, that's why, I've had Del Bigtree from the documentary Vaxxed, the filmmaker who did Vaxxed, and it's same thing. I tell people all the time, I'm like, the idea, like, and that's why you see now too also with this antibacterial soap, how people are saying that they're using too much of it. Like, you need to expose your body to some bacteria and stuff like that so your immune system can strengthen, because your best defense against disease is your immune system. And same thing with vaccines. Like, that's one of the reasons why I was very strict about not giving my kids immediate vaccines when they were born, was because I'm like, if you just understand the way the human body works, I'm like, you're taking a newborn who hasn't been exposed to any diseases, hasn't been exposed to any bacteria or anything. Their immune system hasn't developed yet, and you want to shoot them up with viruses immediately. And it's one of those things where it just logically doesn't seem like it makes sense. But like you're saying, Max Gerson, the German doctor, and also the Huxley, a bunch of these guys, I mean, they were banned from the U.S., right? They couldn't treat people in the U.S. You had to get their treatments in Mexico, and they have lists and lists of people who went to, tried these treatments and have success. And I think Suzanne Somers is another one that she wrote the book Knockout, and I know you have a short clip about her in your documentary. And another one who it's amazing when you see how many people actually have treated or cured themselves of cancer. And like you said, cure probably might not even be the right word, but help their immune system defeat cancer. Yeah, and I think that's the important thing, because there's been quite a few articles, and I think like I forget which newspaper wrote the one I read, but there's quite a few articles about how most doctors who are terminally ill won't do chemo and radiation.
Oh, yes, absolutely. 95% of them say they would not.
Which is crazy.
Interesting. And you want to give it to me?
Exactly. Yeah. It's crazy. And then also
because they're told to. They're told to. Exactly. That's as simple as that. They're slaves of the system.
And this goes back to the history of medicine and what you document in your. And this is why I say you're even if you're not intrigued with these topics, if you're intrigued with history, watching your documentaries alone, that's a good enough reason to watch them, because it really does show you the history of all these topics. And with medicine, a lot of people forget that our ancestors, they considered root extracts and herbs and stuff like that to be medicines, and today they don't, and there's a reason for that.
Up to 100 years ago, you had a choice between allopathic and naturopathic. And then if you study the history of those 30 years between 1910 and 1940, you will see how the chemical industry took over the universities. They took over the the chemical labs. They pushed out the naturalistic doctors. They founded the AMA, American Doctors Association. What's it called?
American Medical Association.
Medical Association. Thank you.
Yeah.
And they slowly pushed out the naturopathic, and they only left the allopathic medicine. But up to 100 years ago, both were available. And in most cases, or in many cases, the naturopathic was more effective, of course, because it had the longest tradition. But it didn't make enough money. And with the chemistry and the new petrochemical era, starting in the 1930s and 40s, they needed to get rid of the naturalistic cures in order to push their chemistry, the chemical medicines. It was necessary. This is how they got rid of hemp, actually. The hemp was used in a ton of situations. It was great food. You could burn it. You could make paper from it. You can make textiles. You can make so many things, and medicines, so many things. And
you still there?
Cutting off my mic when I'm coughing. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Where was I?
Oh, marijuana. And,
yeah, and you could make medicines also. And of course, they needed to get rid of that before they could push their own chemistry in their chemical labs, because otherwise, hemp and marijuana would have been too competitive. They could have never won had not gotten rid of marijuana and the cannabis plant first.
It's interesting how William Hearst, the guy who had all these money invested in timberland and all the wood, and then hemp paper came around and ended up being useful, and hemp, I mean, what a lot of people don't realize is hemp is, I mean, really, for lack of a better term, a magical plant, because it really can do tons of different things. I mean, it can be medicine, it can be yarn, it can be clothes, it can be Henry Ford used it for the fenders of his car. It can be so many different things. So it's amazing how propaganda from so many years ago until of late, it seems, that propaganda stuck around, and it kept convincing people, or kept fooling people into believing that this plant that has so many uses was this drug that was going to make people crazy, and was this gateway drug and all these other things, which is insane. So it's pretty amazing how strong propaganda is, because we can
absolutely.
Yeah.
In the 1940s, they were so effective that whatever lies they started spreading then, they're still believed today by a lot of people, as you say. There's still a lot of people who will repeat today, for example, marijuana is bad for your brain. But if you ask them to point out even just one scientific research that says that, they will not know. They will not find it, because there isn't any. But the propaganda was so effective that you take some things for granted. You take it for a fact. I watched one discussion between, I think it was between Rand Paul and not Alec Baldwin, his brother, which is not as intelligent as Alec Baldwin. They was saying, and this is a stepping stone, and this is just a fact. And I felt, I couldn't ask him because this was television, but I felt like asking, excuse me, could you show me, being a skeptic again, where does it show that this is a fact? Because it is not. But people take it as a fact, and this shows you how effective can propaganda be when the entire system gets behind it and starts pushing for something. So we really, the bottom line is, on any issue that we face and we look at, we need to learn to think with our own brain. We need to remove any prior conviction that we have. There's no absolute truth. We need to wipe the slate clean every time and start from scratch and say, okay, do I want to analyze today how credit cards work? Okay, I'm not going to buy any preconceived idea about credit cards. Let me study this from zero. It is very, it's tasking. It's very heavy to do something like that. It's not easy. It takes a lot of energy to study something from scratch. But again, the satisfaction that you get from reaching a conclusion that it's your own personal conclusion and it's based on what you have found, it's incredible. It's worth the effort. It's worth the effort, because then you start rebuilding your life on truths that they are your own. They're no longer accepted or inherited truths. and you feel much stronger because of that. I have very few convictions, but on those, believe me, I feel so strong I could take down a wall. Whenever I go on debates on television, on radio, on the web, I don't have a problem with anybody. Once I was invited to a few years ago when 9/11 was being discussed, the host of the show says, I'm going to invite somebody very, very big. It's going to be very bad for you. He says, you can invite whoever you want. I said, I know what I know, and that's not going to change. And in fact, I came out pretty well from that confrontation because I knew what I knew, and the guy did not know what he was telling me. That's the difference. Because you go through the process of learning and finding out about yourself, and then it just stays with you. That's yours. It's your own knowledge. It's not inherited, and it's very important to do that.
Well, I think what you said was really important. When your conclusion was met because of a non-agenda driven search, you were searching for the truth with no agenda in mind. You weren't looking for an outcome. You were just going wherever the evidence took you. And I think when you do that, and when you get to a conclusion, and you know that it wasn't a conclusion that you were trying to get, it was just where the evidence took you, that's why you're confident. You're confident because you know that you looked at all the evidence and the conclusion that you came up with is the right one. So I think, yeah, that's definitely a good thing. I think being skeptical is good, and no matter what opinion you might have, even being skeptical of your own opinions. But when you do that much research, much like yourself, like there's certain topics that I'm still very flimsy with. I'm like, yeah, I think this, but I'm not 100% sure. But there's certain things that I've looked into that I know for a fact, or at least I'm pretty sure and very confident that, hey, this is my opinion, and that opinion is based on good evidence, is based on good research, and based on good information. And I think that's really important. I think the cancer topic is similar to 9/11. It's a very emotional topic. I've had loved ones that have had cancer, and I've sent them, my interview I did with Brzezinski, his documentary, your documentary, Rick Simpson's documentary on using hemp oil, and all this information, Suzanne Somers interviews and her book and all this stuff. And I'm trying to get people to just at least pay attention. And I think Chris Carr is another one who I think the author that fought cancer without chemo and radiation. But all this information, and I'm just like, listen, all I'm saying is that your options, or your lack of options that your doctor's telling you that, hey, these are your only options, isn't true. And maybe you should look at all options and really re-examine how you want to handle this. But it's so hard. There's something about the fear of being wrong. Like, if I don't listen to this professional's advice and I'm wrong, my life could be, on the line. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. Have you ever had anybody, close person to you or a loved one, where you had to have that conversation with them?
All the time. Not only close to me, but because I'm pretty known in Italy for the films I've made, people call me and write to me all the time. My mother has cancer. What do I do? And my usual answer is, I'm not going to tell you which therapy I think is best for your situation. A, because I'm not a doctor, and B, because I'm not your relative. I'm not your brother or parent, or it's not my family. So it's your decision. But what I do encourage you to do is to look at all the options and consider that when they tell you that you only have A, B, and C, it's not necessarily true, just like you said before. But again, sometimes you hit against a wall, and people don't want to know. The reason why is not that they don't believe that there is an alternative cure, but like you said, is that if you accept that there is an alternative cure, then you have to take matters into your own hands. And that step is very difficult, because it's much easier to have the professor tell you what to do or not to do, okay? He knows best. I'm sure he knows what to say. This removes from you the responsibility of your own choices. If you only knew how that professor, quote unquote, works in his brain, and if you only knew that to him you're just a number, and you're just a liver or a lung or a brain, because that's where your cancer is, then you would start thinking differently, and you would get away immediately from that guy. But it's very difficult. It's understandable. We're brought up to believe that that they know, and we should just shut up and listen when you go to a doctor. And that's actually part of their aura. They're part of their magic, you know. They have this white thing on. They have this little thing with a collar with the earphones on. And who's going to argue with this guy? But if you only ask him a few questions, doctor, if you were me, would you do the same? And you see the hesitation in his face, that should be enough to at least make you think, okay, let me look into something else. It comes down to free will and to free choice, freedom of choice. Those who have enough strength, enough courage, enough sense of self to take matters in your own hands, you may solve the problems much better than others. And others, if they're doomed by a way of thinking that makes you think that you have just to listen to the doctor, well, that's too bad. There's really not much you can argue with those people. I usually don't push the issue too much. Even if it's a close friend, I say, look, I think this, you should know this, but from here on, it's your choice. And, if you need me, all the information I have is yours, but you need to ask for it. I'm not going to push it into you because, again, it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah, I've been in a very similar situation, actually twice, and both times it was the same thing. At first, I'm like, okay, I need to say something because if I don't say anything, I'm going to feel guilty. I want people to know that these options are out there. But then once I do that part, I don't want to be pushy because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I've done my part. I've given you the information, and then you decide what you want to do and what you want to do with this information. And in both cases, it was it was very hard for somebody to take a podcaster or I'm a construction worker full time or whatnot, and to take my opinion over this person, like you said, who has these diplomas on the wall and has a suit and has his own clinic and whatever. This person who, but what we have to realize is that it's not even the doctor's fault, I think, in many cases, because it's what they were taught, and like you were saying before about how the AMA slowly start filtering out homeopathic medicines and doctors and kind of start looking at them as that's not real medicine, that's not real doctors. And before, medicine used to try to figure out what was wrong with you and try to fix it, try to correct it. Now we just look at the symptoms, and I think that's why functional medicine is getting popular. Chris Kessler, he's a functional medicine doctor, and he had a good metaphor. He said that modern medicine is like having a rock in your shoe and your doctor giving you a pill for the pain instead of telling you to take off your shoe. and
nice one.
It's very similar. It's all doctors do is they try to like, here's the symptom, and then here's the this is how you you fix the symptom. But it's not, they're not getting to the root cause of the issue. And like you said, when it comes down to fighting cancer or any disease, if you can increase your immune system strength to fight these things, then that alone should be helpful. Where for example, many cases have I heard, and even one that I've seen firsthand with a loved one, where they would go through chemo and radiation and their bodies would get so weak that they couldn't do it anymore. Then once they got off the chemo and radiation, then slowly they started improving, and they're like, okay, now they're healthy enough for some more chemo and radiation, and they do it again, and it's this vicious cycle. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Don't you see that the chemo and radiation is actually what's killing them? So it's like you said, these are really hard topics and conversations to have, because it is in many cases it is life or death, and you are talking about making decisions that could be life-saving or life-threatening, and you're not sure, and it's really easy to look up this information and saying that, hey, people should try this, people should try that, but when it's yourself, or if it's myself, it's like, I want to believe that I would also make those decisions of not doing the mainstream treatment, but looking for some alternative treatment that could be more helpful and less harmful. Because even people who are cured or cancer or treat cancer with chemo and radiation and survive, a lot of them have long-term issues. The chemo and radiation has long-term effects on all types of things: joint pain, digestive problems. So many different issues, and in many cases also the cancer returns. So
yes, they're considered cured because they reached a 5-year limit, but then they're really not, because maybe 6, 7, 8 years after they fall and have another cancer. They think it's a new cancer, but maybe it's the same one that just came back.
Now,
Yeah.
how's in Europe, in Italy specifically, how different is the medical industry than the U.S.? Is it really similar when it comes down to just doctors trying to sell you pills and giving you prescription drugs and whatnot, or are they more open-minded to homeopathic medicines?
A little more open-minded. Let's not say to homeopathic, but to looking at you as a general being. They're not as mechanical, let's say, as the United States. The United States is such a competitive business that you have to crank out X number of patients per day, per hour, per minute, and they all fall into patterns. Here you find often a doctor that's more human, so to speak, and which is an incredible thing to have to say. You know, I mean, all doctors should be human by definition, but they're not. The main difference, though, is in the health system. In the conception of the health system. In the United States, health is considered a good, something that you sell and buy, and it's part of a market. In Europe, most countries, health is considered a right, a constitutional right. And therefore, you have most European countries who have health systems that are either state-funded or partially state-funded. For example, here, if I were to have any major disease, I would be cured for free. The difference is in the philosophy, not so much in the attitude of the doctors. The philosophy in America is that health it's a competitive market, just like any other market. That's why the Obamacare had so many problems, came out half-baked as it came, and now it's not even there. People don't even want it that way, and it's going to be very, very difficult to find a good balance. Because if you consider it a competitive market, automatically you exclude those people who cannot afford it. And I don't think it's fair. I mean, humanly, health should be a right and not just something that you need to buy.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's funny because you have these conversations and people are like, oh, that's socialism. And it's just like, well, we have a lot of socialist ideas already in America. I mean, we have the police station, we have postal service, you know, we get our mail. I mean, these are all socialist ideas. These are the idea that the society contributes, we all decide to contribute for this one service. And healthcare should be no different. We have some of the most expensive healthcare in the world and some of the worst healthcare in the world. So it's like, what, you know, people think that like having socializing healthcare would be a bad idea. But it wouldn't be, and it couldn't get any worse. And the way I look at it is that, like, for example, I have a 2-year-old and a 8-month-old. My son's 2 and my daughter's 8 months, and it's you know, the healthcare for the whole family. My wife works part-time so she can be home with the kids more often, and you know, insurance is a huge part of our budget. You know, it's expensive, and it's, you know, it's not cheap, and a lot of people, you know, are paying for these services. And I have a family, but if I'm single and I'm a healthy kid in my 20s or early 30s, and I'm forced to have health insurance, and yet I'm not using it, you know, that kind of sucks too, you know. So it's the idea that so many people stress about, you know, medical bills. You know, it's something that you know, oh, if I get sick, or if I have to go to the hospital, or if I have to go in an ambulance, if I have to, you know, it's like it ends up, you know, creating debt and issues with families. And you know, if we could remove that part, it'd be amazing. And I think that it would only be helpful to everybody. If you have the money to go to better doctors or whatnot, then you can still do that. You can still have those type of options if you like. And so much of the Western world, you know, in Europe and stuff, do this, and Canada does it. We're the only country that doesn't. I mean, obviously those countries aren't complaining about it because they're not changing it. So all these critiques or this propaganda that we're being sold that it's such a bad thing, maybe we should re-examine. But I think America's done such a good job of anything that seems like a socialist idea, they critique it and they make it seem evil and such a bad thing. And, you know, socialism is one step away from communism, and you know, and you know, so it just it just goes back to the whole propaganda. I think Bernie Sanders, when he ran, the fact that he ran as outspoken socialist and was as popular as he was, I think it's a step in the right direction. I think people are becoming much more open-minded to these different philosophies and ideas, which we should be. I think these ideologies should be no different. I think that we should look at the evidence, look at the facts, look at each idea on its own, and then come up with a conclusion. And I think, unfortunately, we don't do that. You know, we pick a team, just like we pick the truther team or the debunker team. We also pick, you know, I'm a socialist, a conservative, or a libertarian, or whatever, and we don't look at just the facts, and we don't look at just the evidence, and look at each idea as its own thing. We pick a team and defend our team.
Ricardo, what you're describing is a human society. And strangely enough, we don't have one. It should be like that. It should be like you say. People should be reasonable, thinking, you know, think about each other and do the right thing. And it should be very simple. But it's not because of greed. Greed is what changes everything. The same things that you told me now, put them in the mouth of some of those who control the big insurance companies. They will hate you for what you've said because they will not make as much money. The same is with oil, with the medicines, and with everything, with the armaments, with everything else. So it's really a culture of greed that we need to fight, and it's not easy. It's going to take a lot of generations. It is happening, though. It's changing. Things are changing slowly. But it's going to take a lot of generations before this culture of greed starts to wear out.
Well,
by then, I myself, I won't be there. I'm not even sure you will be there. Maybe your kid will be able to see something of that. Maybe.
Well, I think the internet's helping because you look at
it. It is.
You know, you look at it. I can put me and you can talk about whatever topic we want, whatever issue we want, and we can post it online and we can share it with the world. It can be downloaded in Sweden and China and wherever, and nobody can stop us. Well, at least for now, nobody can stop us. And we have that freedom. Same thing with you know, your documentaries can be shared all over the internet. And we have that freedom to share these ideas. And I think because people have access to this, where before, you know, like my parents were born and they grew up in Portugal where they didn't have a TV. But people who grew up in America, you know, their parents or grandparents, they grew up watching TV with 3 channels. And whatever that news told you was going on, that's kind of what was going on. You didn't really do your own research. You know, whatever the newspaper told you, that's what you accepted. Where today, you can kind of do your own research and see if there's you know, some evidence to prove if it's correct or not.
I think that the internet is really the point of no return of history. There's no going back. You cannot unknow the things that we know now, and then that's thanks to the internet. And we go back to the original thing we spoke in the beginning of this show. When I got involved with making my films, it was really the internet that made me so passionate about researching. I mean, I couldn't believe I could just type something and find out about it. 10 years before, if I wanted to know something about, like, I don't know, World War I would have to even be lucky to have a book in my house, but it would be only one book from one person from one angle. Or I would have to go to a library and look for something. Now you just type in and you find wherever you want, and then you decide. I mean, it's so fascinating. And again, there is no return from here. It's going to take a long time because the resistance of the powers that be is very strong. But it's weakening, and that's already a good sign. And I think that, you know, in 2 more generations, the world will be completely different from now. At least we do whatever we can for that to happen. Okay, let's put it this way.
Yeah, and you know what? If that's why this show is called the Ripple Effect Podcast, because I truly believe in the concept of the ripple effect. I believe that we all can start our own little ripple, and we can all do our part in sharing different ideas and perspectives and being open-minded. And even if the only thing that you do to contribute is sparking conversation and or maybe sharing your documentary or whatever the thing is that you do, no matter how little it seems, it can turn into a big ripple. And I think that as long as we believe that, we can all, you know, start making a difference little by little. So I think it's important for us to truly believe in the power of ourselves and what we can do to change the world. Actually,
for your show, you should adopt a quotation from Robert Kennedy. He said, I'm paraphrasing now by memory. He said, no one is big enough to change the world. No person in the world is big enough to change the history of the world. But if each of us, with our own little daily actions, do the right thing, they will create ripples that will slowly go down the mountain and form a big river that will be the change of humanity.
Huh.
Something like that.
Yeah, I've never even heard that quote. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I found it when I was researching. I mean, there are some quotations from him that just stuck with me. This is one of them. The idea that no one is big enough, but if we all do our little part, these little ripples come down the mountain and they form the big river, and that big river is a change. It's a nice image.
Yeah. There's also another quote that I like.
I'll find the exact quote for you. I'll send it so you can put it on your website, because I think it fits perfectly in your website.
Yeah. That's there's another one. Every great change in the world started with a small group of men and an idea, or something like that. I think these quotes are important, because I think people have to, they have to realize, and I think realizing this helps them find the motivation to do something. But realize that every great change in the world did start with just one person and idea, or a couple people and idea. And I'm sure at the time it seemed like they would have no effect on the world. And sometimes some of the most inspirational people were just normal average Joes who end up being passionate about something and really try to make a difference in the world. So I think those are really important ideas, because I tell people all the time on this podcast, I'm like, whatever you love doing, whatever your passion is, do it, because life's too short not to. And it just, that's why it's awesome to meet people like yourself who are doing what you love. You're doing these very important documentaries and hitting on very important topics. And with that, we should also talk about how American Moon. Are you still looking for funding for American Moon?
Actually, yes. I'm in the finishing part of the film, but I do need to travel now. I have to go to London, Paris, New York, to interview some famous photographers from that era, from the 70s. With the same photographers, they use the same cameras and the same film that you have in the Apollo pictures. And I need some help with that. So if anybody is willing to help, I have a GoFundMe page. It's called gofundme.com/American Moon. And whatever donation is appreciated, I thank you very much. Also, my DVDs are available on Amazon, but also if you don't want or you cannot afford to buy them, they're all available on YouTube for free. That's what I do with all my films. So I keep the DVDs, the sales, for those who can afford it and want to give me a little help. But if not, I think that this information is too important to be withheld. So I every time I do one, I end up putting it on YouTube as well. So if you look, Cancer, the Forbidden Cures is on YouTube. The New American Century is on YouTube. The New Pearl Harbor, September 11, is on YouTube. Be ready, because it's 5 hours long.
Yeah.
If you really want to understand the discussion on 9/11, that's the one film you need to look at.
How long did it take you to do a 5 hour? I mean, that movie must have took forever.
3 years.
Wow. Yeah.
Took me 3 years, but that's because I had already researched 9/11 since 2002. So basically, I knew most of the things. But it took me 3 years because I just wanted to put an end to this. I don't want to say bad words on your show, but
it's okay. You could swear on this show. Say it in Italian.
Like cagate, bullshit that people, that the debunkers come up with in order to defend the official version. So I said, okay, I'm just going to tackle these one by one, and I'm breaking them down one by, and I did, and I'm proud of that. So that work stays. I can go now, but that's on the internet, and it's there forever. And so it's a good sense of accomplishment, that film. I'm trying to do the same now with the one on the moon, although this is a little different in emotional impact. Because the moon, okay, so it happened 50 years ago. So if we were lied to, so what? But again, if you think carefully and you put them all together, then you have the Kennedy assassination, the Robert Kennedy assassination, the John Kennedy, the moon hoax, the 9/11, and you start questioning what is true and what is not, because everything that we've been told is not true. And the picture that comes out of all these lies together is one major picture, which is, again, what I call the big lies of history.
Yeah, what's crazy is there actually hasn't been a really good documentary on JFK. There's only a handful, of documentaries that I've seen that are all right, but there hasn't been, like, what I like about your September 11th film is it kind of, like you said, it kind of puts an end to all the arguments. Like you covered everything, And now after that, if you watch those 5 hours, there's not too much left to say, you know.
No,
So
exactly, yes.
And I think this the JFK assassination is kind of a similar thing where there's so many conflicting opinions and what happened and what didn't happen that
well,
and yeah.
The JFK assassination kind of solved itself because if you know enough about it, you know that the actual killer, the guy who shot from the grassy knoll, does exist, does have a name, and has told his story to a camera. The problem is nobody wants to pick it up. But if you, I made a little short 30-minute film on that. If anybody wants to look into that in detail, you know who killed Kennedy. The name is James Files. He was 21 at that time. He shot from the grassy knoll. He was the right-hand man of one mafia guy from Chicago called Nicoletti. And the third guy who shot is named Johnny Rosselli. There were one team out of two teams that were in Dealey Plaza. I mean, all the details are actually being told. What is fun is that whenever you talk to a debunker about any of these big controversial issues, they say, oh, a conspiracy is so large, somebody sooner or later would have spilled the beans, right? This is one argument you hear all the time. On the moon, everybody at NASA knew, so somebody would have spilled the beans. Kennedy assassination, it takes so many people to do that, somebody would spill the beans. Well, the problem is that when they do spill the beans, nobody wants to listen to them. This guy is saying on camera, he's explaining how he shot, why was he behind the grassy knoll, what did he think looking through the telescope, all that, but nobody wants to hear it. So we go back to the denial part of your discourse before, which is, do we really want to hear the truth, or do we just want to be tickled with it? And most people just want to be tickled. They don't really want to hear the final word. But for the Kennedy assassination, it's over. It's there. People who died, before they died, they actually spoke. The other guy who confessed was...
E. Howard Hunt. E. Howard Hunt had...
Yeah, Howard Hunt. Yeah. He confessed. He left a taped confession to his son. He told everything, all the details. And there's even a third person now, the name escapes me. He was the guy who actually printed the fake IDs for Oswald, who was a CIA asset, by the way. And he also told the story. Everybody, and all these stories together, they connect perfectly. There's no contradiction anymore. Oswald was CIA. James Files was Mafia. Mafia and CIA worked together to do the assassination. One helps the other, actually. Many of the unsolved questions of the Kennedy assassination do become solved when you cross-reference all these testimonies from these people. And it's all very clear. Yeah. But, for example, the guy who made the interview with James Files 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he probably thought he had the scoop of the century when he was filming that. And lo and behold, nobody wanted to buy it. Not because it's not believable, because you cannot go on television and actually say that the CIA and the Mafia killed Kennedy. You can't say that officially. You can leave the doubt. You can tickle the people with the possibility. You can play with it. You can play with the words and say, could it possibly, maybe, what? But you're not going to do that. You're not going to bring that to a full acceptance. You cannot officially state, yes, the CIA and the Mafia did it. Because then the institution's credibility would collapse. And you can't have that. Well, and that's why you go as close as 99% to the truth, but you never really hit 100%.
Well, it is amazing when people say that, oh, somebody would have said something. Because if you do a little bit of research, you realize a lot of people did say something. And a lot, you know, I've had
people listen.
Yeah, exactly. I had Abraham Bolden on my show. I don't know if you're familiar with Abraham Bolden's story, but he was the first black Secret Service agent on a presidential detail. And he has an interesting story linked to the JFK assassination and him wanting to testify from the Warren Commission because apparently there's a plot to kill the president in Chicago, and they found somebody with a sniper rifle, and it's a really interesting story. But you know, you look at his story. A lot of people, his story is very much unknown to a lot of people, and you look at when you do your research and you find out all these people who testified or talked to the CIA and then end up having mysterious deaths. You know, people who said that what they told the police ended up being different than what the police said that they said. So all these, just all these inconsistencies, and it's like all that stuff is there, So, but when you talk about keeping secrets, I mean, look at Project Manhattan. When they were creating the bomb, and it was secret to the world. Nobody knew what was going on, and nobody talked. Same thing with like when Edward Snowden came out, and he was a whistleblower talking about what the NSA was doing. There's a lot of people like Alex Jones, a conspiracy theorist, that were saying, oh, the government's listening to all your phone calls and watching your webcam and all this stuff. But a lot of people just kind of brushed it off as conspiracy theory because nobody from the inside actually talked, because they kept it a good secret. And then Snowden came out and exposed it. So it's like, look, all these people that were involved in the NSA and Booz Allen and the CIA doing all this, using all the spy software and stuff like that, and nobody said a thing publicly. So secrets can be kept, and they are kept. And so this idea that just because nobody on CNN or Fox News is on there saying something doesn't mean that there aren't people talking, or that there's not truth to some of these things. So
they just don't make it to primetime TV. That's all.
Exactly, because they have a agenda of keeping the industrial military complex going, and keeping us wanting to go into war. And since we've been in war as long as I've been alive, and probably as long as my kid's going to be alive, and it's just it sucks. So, but thank you so much. What I'll have you do, I'll have you send me the links to the GoFundMe account and all that stuff, and whatever websites you want my listeners to check out, or whatever's the easiest way of getting in contact with you. I don't know if you. I think you have a Facebook. I think you might have a Twitter too. I don't know if you use it often.
Yeah, I have a Twitter. I never look. I have a Facebook, but it's in Italian. It's really for me to spread my own articles, not to communicate with people. Now, my email is. You can give my email to anybody who wants it if they need it. And if you could promote my GoFundMe, that whatever help comes in at this point is really welcome.
Great. Did you have English? I know you have an Italian website. Do you have an English website by any chance?
No. The GoFundMe is in English.
It's in English.
The
okay.
video interview I have on the GoFundMe is in English, so people don't have a problem. I have a little 6-minute video that explains what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah. I'll share that
My
too.
website is only in Italian because I really deal with Italy now, and besides, for me to write in English, it's not as easy as Italian. I do articles in 10 minutes in Italian. In English, I could never do that. Besides, it's not my turf. I mean, my turf is Italy, and I'm happy with what I do here.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, this show's downloaded all over the world, so there's going to be hopefully some Italian listeners who well, they're probably already familiar with your work, to be honest.
Okay.
But that's the cool thing about podcasts and the internet is that everybody all over the world can have access to it. So
send me a link when you have it online, so I'll save it for myself.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, once it's up and live, hopefully, usually, counting on how busy I am or whatnot, within a couple of days I can have it up online, and then I'll send it to you, and feel free to, it's all open source, so feel free to post and share wherever you would like. And any websites or anything that you want me to share, also email me that, and I'll put that in the show notes so people can, get to your stuff.
Okay.
And I'll definitely promote your GoFundMe page, because you do amazing work. And I know that there's, I've had a lot of documentary filmmakers on, and the one thing they all have in common is they all say how there's not a lot of money in documentaries. And so, I'm sure any help would be very useful.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Hey, Riccardo, it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, now I'm sure it's a beautiful Sunday afternoon in Italy. You should be going to drink some wine and enjoying the nice weather.
I'm actually having a little pasta right now. Okay.
Oh, yeah. You a wine drinker?
You can't be Italian and not.
I was gonna say, yeah, of course.
Film is ready. I'll let you know, and if you want to do another show on that, I'll be happy to do it, of course.
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, next time you're.
I'll show it to you first, and then you tell me what do you think.
Yeah, once the film is ready, I'd love to have you on to talk about it, so I can help promote it.
Right. Yeah.
Great.
Let's do that.
Well, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and grazie.
Grazie, Riccardo. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye bye.
Believe in the ripple effect.